So we've been talking about guide tones and target tones, and that the guide tone is the third or the seventh, followed by a root or fifth, and that the target tone is usually the root or the fifth or the third, and that the way it works is that if, let's say we have four beats or quarter notes. If we had just 4 quarter notes in a measure, then each one of these could represent a chord tone. In other words, like an arpeggio, root, third, fifth, seventh. Whether this is a flat third or a flat seventh doesn't matter, but that would be all you're doing there is playing an arpeggio. So if you're just playing like a C, that's not much. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you were adding, like say you were doing a minor here, or it could be minor 6. The point is that you don't really have much to do there. So the 8th note idea is to place notes in between there. So when you place the notes in between, you have an option. You can play a note that's a half step or a whole step away from the chord tone that you're going to. Okay. Now, obviously, a simple procedure would be, let's say you're playing the B minor, or and you have, all you're doing there is adding a half step from below, and then you've heard that a million times in Django's playing. And then you have a whole step above. You could go, okay, on the 5th you don't need to, and then root, whole step there. On there we have the flat third, and there's the 5th. I was using a half step above that. Now, why am I using a half step above and not a whole step? Well, I have to think whether I'm using a natural minor scale, a Dorian, or if I'm thinking in basically harmonic minor. Now, in Gypsy jazz, the harmonic minor scale is used most often, and maybe one other note from the melodic minor, and that is making the choice for me about that whole step or half step from above. So if we do if we did both of them, we could go this. See, there's that one. Now that was half steps because of the scale itself. And then we have, oops, I did that in the wrong key. And then this one. You've heard that a lot. Again, that would be called, by way of a, the word I'm looking for, an abbreviated way of saying it, or a cliche, or a label you put on it. People call it enclosure. You're enclosing the, you're enclosing or encapsulating the chord tones, okay, surrounding them. But that's one way of looking at it. But basically in music, all that is neighboring tones. That's an upper neighboring tone or a lower neighboring tone. Okay, and the reason why those half steps are in there on the minor one is because of the harmonic minor scale. So if you went like this, this is your scale. Okay, so if you looked at each chord tone in relationship to the surrounding scale there, then you would see why the half steps are involved sometimes rather than the whole steps, because in the scale, that's the scale tone already. So for example, in this, there's the root there, and if the 5th is here, the next scale tone in the harmonic minor scale is here, above the 5th. And so then when I come down, I'm going to go back, then I will use a chromatic note or a half step right there. And then the same on this one, a whole step, and then a half step below, which is a scale tone as well. And then we can do this. That's the 4th, but on the 3rd, that's a flat third, and this note is in the scale anyway. And then this one's obvious again because we just did it. So we have a half step above because it's part of the scale tone, and then the half step below, which is the chromatic passing tone. And the same thing then for this one. There's the scale to upper scale tone, and then this is the half step below, but it is also a scale tone. So you can see that's how or why we're doing it that way. Now you do that with each of your 3 chord types: your minor, your major, your dominant chord types. And remember, we're talking about songs being broken down into just basically 2 categories: major and minor keys. And in the major key, we're going to use the major scale as our scale, our parental scale source. And for the minor, we're going to use Harmonic Minor as our parental scale source. So all the chords that we derive in our progression, chord progressions, will either be from one of those 2. We're not going to talk too much about modes or any of the other stuff right now. This is the basic fundamentals of getting your harmonic center outlined and defined. So let's say we were doing this on the, let's say we're in major and we're doing, say, an A major, and then we had a B minor, and we have a E7, and then back to the major. I think we had a lick went in our last video. Now if you look at that and you outline that, that's the 3rd, and go to the 5th of the chord there. I'm talking about thinking of it in chord shapes. So this B minor, so I had a flat 3rd, the 5th, flat 7. There, right there is the 2nd. So we had root. There was a chromatic tone right there. Half step between that and the flat 7. So we had. Now I use this flat 5 here, but I could use a regular 5. I think I may have used the regular 5 in the lesson the last time. And it kind of sounds a little more harmonically centered and civil. And so we go from there. We've run out of notes, but let's take a look at count the notes before we did this. We had a regular 3rd, which is our guide tone, starting off. First beat of the measure outlining the B minor, and then we went to the 5th. Now that's obviously a chord tone, but it's on an and. But as soon as we do the next note, we are back on a chord tone again, so it's okay. Nobody's going to notice anything. It adds more structure. And then here we are to the flat. The 2nd degree. And that would be on the and. So we have 1 and 2 and then we're going to go back to the root, 3 and then here we have the 4, and that was a chord tone, and then I used the 5th again rather than the flat 5, and now we're done with that particular measure if we're doing 8th notes, and we want to move to our next chord, which would be E7. If we're in A, see? So I'm going to start that on the 3rd also. And again, I'm just going to use, in terms of a scale, I'm going to use the diminished scale. You could think also of a half whole diminish. You could think of taking a altered dominant or a dominant, and then adding some diminished notes. There's a lot of ways of looking at this and analyzing it, but I want to make it simple. So when we go to the E7, we're just going to do this, and I have 3 notes there, 4, and on the 4th, that was the end. That should be the ending note. That should be the next measure coming up there. So we'd have from the E7, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, dramatic note, and then we want to resolve, always resolve. Resolving is something that sounds the best when it's a half step resolve, usually. That's the Bach way, I guess you could say. It's a leading tone. Leading tone means it leads into. So you go from a dissonant to a consonant. So in this regard here, with the E7, we've got the third, followed by the fifth. Then we have the flat 7. Then on here we have the introduction, of a flat 9. So if you have a E7 flat 9, there's the flat 9, and then we're back here to the third, and then I go up to the fifth, and then it's a flat 7 again. And then that half step, or the that note there. Now that note is, let's see, what is that note compared to the root? So we'd have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, sharp 5 is what we've got there. So analyzing it again is the third, fifth, flat 7, flat 9, third, 5, flat 7, and then a sharp 5, and then resolving it to here. So we have a A major. Now you don't have to use the diminished, but I think it sounds. I think it sounds good. So if you put those two together. So now you'll notice that on the 5 chord, that's the E7, I use the alterations. That's because they're inherently natural. They're natural in terms of the scale source. They're not natural chord tones. They're altered chord tones if you're just looking at the E7 chord. But within the scale itself, if I was playing an A harmonic minor, you'd find those notes in that scale, because there's your flat 9. And you have a sharp 5 in there and a flat 9. That's what I'm trying to say. Now those alterations actually belong to harmonic minor, not to A major, obviously. So when I was talking about doing 2 different types of scale sources for our chords and for our harmony, the major scale and those chords that belong to that parental key center versus the harmonic minor and those chords which belong to an A harmonic minor harmonization. I've neglected to say that the E7 was coming from the harmonic minor. So therefore what we were doing is mixing and matching. We're going a 2 chord in like in a major key to a implied altered dominant in harmonic minor, and then back to the natural major. Now this happens a lot in jazz all over the place, and I didn't break it down into 2 categories. I just kind of put those 2 together. But you should break them down into thinking of major and minor key centers and the chords that belong to them. So normally it would have been a B minor 7 flat 5 to an A E7 flat 9 to a or you could have sometimes it'd be A minor 6. But the thing is, even though that's the main chord used in gypsy jazz, that 6 is not in harmonic minor. It's a flat 6. But it can be used, especially in soloing, as a passing tone. Okay, so we have, there's your flat 6. So if we went, it's kind of a weird sound, but it functions pretty much like the blues does. You know, when you hear blues, you know, like, and then that's major, and people will use, you know, they'll use a pentatonic over that. Now, there's no flat 3 in your kind of a chord progression chord. So why is it okay to use the flat 3rd? Because it's a tension tone which is going to resolve, and that has to do with the blues and how it moves the chord progression, and then those intervallic inversions. And it's the same thing with this. Yeah, you can use that altered dominant over the major because it's going to resolve itself. Tension, resolution. This is the whole thing in music. Tension, resolution. Tension, resolution. Okay. So again, 2, 5, 1 would be the natural thing in major key. 2, minor 7, flat 5, altered dominant, and then to your let's say your minor major 9 or minor major 7 or just minor, and that's pretty much for that. Now the next time around I want to get into the actual chord shapes, and I want you to look at the chord shapes and then create line forms that go over this. I haven't even got to how the line forms can be created. I'm still working on this guide tone principle, target tone principle, and showing you that the notes that are added to the line that you create are either scale tones or a chromatic passing tone, and that fills in the gap. But actually how you make it sound melodic, that has a lot to do with chord scale harmonization, and I'll get into that in the next session. Okay? So I hope that helps a little bit, and let me know if it does. See you next time.